Let's step into one of the most consistently misunderstood decisions in brand strategy: identifying the correct audience for the brand. Before we start in, I want to clarify that I use the term patrons instead of the classic terms used by many strategists. My reason is simple. Most of the terms in marketing come from violent roots, and this is an area where one of them really shines. We're not targeting people. We're looking for folks who will come to love our brands. So starting with an attack mentality sets us off on the wrong footing completely. Patrons as a word makes a lot more sense in this light because we're seeking their patronage, their preference, their devotion. And with that mentality in place, building a relationship is a lot easier and rooted in the right sentiment. When discussing the idea of patrons, it's worth starting with the tension that surfaces almost every time the conversation happens. It goes something like this. You're in a room with a team or multiple teams, and someone says, or maybe it's written on the agenda, "We need to get more specific about who we're for." And the immediate response is hesitation, not because the idea is wrong, but because the implications feel completely risky. Specificity can feel like exclusion. It can feel like a narrowing opportunity, limiting the reach or leaving revenue on the table. And so a lot of people just clam up. That concern is understandable, but it often leads brands in the wrong direction. When the aperture is open too wide, when a brand attempts to speak to everyone or just large swaths of unrelated people, the result is rarely broader appeal. More often, it produces messaging that is diluted and distinct and easily forgettable. The brand becomes acceptable to many, but meaningful to very few, if any at all. And without meaning, there is no loyalty, and without loyalty, there is no advocacy. So the objective is not to choose between focus and growth. The objective is to identify the group that enables growth. In my approach, we move away from the idea of single monolithic target audience. Instead, we think of terms of primary and secondary patron groups. Secondary patrons represent the larger set of people who will engage with the brand over time. They are important. They contribute to scale, but they are not the starting point. The primary patron functions as the nucleus of the brand's growth. And importantly, it is not necessarily the largest segment available in markets. In fact, selecting a primary patron based solely on size often leads to misalignment. Instead, the primary patron is identified through or defined through a combination of three factors. Prevalence. They exist in meaningful numbers within your current or intended trade areas or market served. Not necessarily the largest group, but present enough to have impact. The second one is persuasiveness, meaning they influence others around them. Their choices shape group decisions, recommendations, and behaviors. They act as informal amplifiers of the brand. And then finally, the third one is potential, or are they primed to love the brand? There's a natural fit between the brand and what this group values. The brand resonates with their identity, preferences, and expectations without requiring a lot of persuasion. When a group scores highly across these three dimensions, it becomes a strong candidate for the primary patron. And when a brand is built to resonate deeply with that group, secondary patrons tend to follow. Not because the brand is trying to appeal to everyone, but because it has earned relevance with the right people. It's critical in this exercise when you're identifying patron groups to move beyond just demographics. It's very challenging, and in identifying this group in a meaningful way can have its bumps, and the natural inclination is to go to those demographics. Most brands do it and often stop after that. With demographic data, age ranges, income levels, household composition. And while it's useful to find these people in other areas, the information is limiting. It describes who is present, but not why they choose brands. To build a more complete understanding, we have to think in two layers: the profile layer, which is that demographic, and the projection layer, And I'm going to explain those now. The profile layer is about establishing the landscape. It includes demographic and behavioral data that helps map the composition of your trade areas or market served. Tools such as Esri's tapestry segmentation, when combined with census data, provide a structured way to understand which lifestyle segments are most prevalent in your markets. This is valuable for site selection, expansion planning, and establishing an initial hypothesis about potential patron groups. However, this layer provides orientation and not insight. It tells you who's there and where they are, but it does not explain why they engage and why they would shift their behaviors. That's what the projection layer is all about. It's about understanding meaning and motivation in these groups. To understand choice, we have to move deeper than demographics. Every patron is making more than a functional decision. They're making a decision that reflects identity, how they see themselves, and/or how they wish to be perceived by the world around themselves. They're also stepping away from emotional territories that have become overbearing in their excess, as discussed in previous episodes. This is why similar products at similar price points can attract very demographically different audiences. The distinction is not in the product alone, but in the meaning attached to it. As explored in my book, Mass Behaving, people align with brands that reflect the ideals they hold for themselves. Behavior becomes a signal of identity, and brand choice becomes a way of expressing that identity. And understanding this fully requires different inputs. First, there's behavioral data. Purchase patterns, visit frequency, and affinity with other brands reveal underlying preferences and priorities. Behavior often provides a more accurate signal than stated preferences. Surveys, which are designed for motivation, they're effective. They move beyond surface level questions. Instead of asking people what they like, would they explore why choices are made, how experiences are perceived, and what meaning is attached to those choices? And then there's qualitative research like focus groups and intercepts. These are direct conversations which allow for deeper exploration. When facilitated well, they can uncover motivations and perceptions that are not immediately visible with the quantitative. And then there's movement and contextual data. For physical brands, tools that track movement patterns and visitation behavior can add another layer of understanding, revealing how your brand fits into broader routines and decision-making context. To bring these four elements together, a structured approach is extremely helpful. So let's lay out what that could look like. First, you have to define the landscape. Use segmentation and demographic data to understand who is present in your trade areas. From there, step 2 is to form initial hypotheses. Identify potential primary patron groups based on prevalence and alignment. 3, validate through behavior. Analyze transactional and behavioral data to understand engagement patterns. 4, deepen through research. Use surveys and qualitative methods to uncover motivation, identity, and meaning. Number 5, and the final one, is to identify the intersection. Focus on where identity, values, and unmet needs align with your brand and what that can uniquely provide. This intersection is where demographic profile becomes a fully realized patron. The final thought on this whole scenario is simple. The brands that build enduring loyalty are not those that attempt to appeal broadly from the outset. They're the ones that develop a deep, nuanced understanding of a specific group of people. And then they create an experience from product to service, everything that resonates meaningfully with them and essentially evokes that spirit. When that alignment is achieved, growth follows, not as a result of broad appeal, but as a consequence of relevance and advocacy. And that's the magic. By fully understanding your core primary patrons' motivations, you can start to attach an archetypal driver that will essentially pull them ahead on a psychological layer. So doing the research here and spending the time to fully excavate a very well-rounded data-backed understanding of your primary patron and their secondary patrons that they influence, that is the key to unlocking which archetype makes the most sense for your brand, and then how to reform and alter and transform the brand effectively to speak to them, and draw them ahead in their behavioral journey. Hopefully that made a lot of sense. As always, I would love for you to subscribe to this. It is absolutely free, at least for now. So please like, subscribe, and do share this. I would love for this to get out there. And thank you in advance until next time.